Hello guys, Fru here. Welcome to the presentation today. In today's presentation, we're going to be talking about Snowpark. We're going to look at what Snowpark is. We're going to dive in to do an installation of our environment using IntelliJ. I'm going to set up the specific configurations for Snowpark, connecting that with Snowflake, analyzing some data. And along the way, we're going to have some conversations about why is Snowpark one of the greatest revolutions we're seeing today in the data ecosystem processing data. We know Snowflake fundamentally changed the playbook in terms of analyzing data with the separation of storage from compute, the elastic data warehouse that allows teams to process data with blazing fast performance at a very economical fashion. Now, uh, teams working with Snowflake would interact with the environment using SQL, but then you have folks that are not SQL native. So these are your Java developers, these are your Python developers, these are your Scala developers. And they would seem to have been left out of the conversation because now you have to write SQL in order to work with data. And so Snowflake went back to the drawing book and solved that with Snowpack, which allows you with a native API to write in your favorite language, whatever the language is, you can write in your favorite language, and Snowpark is going to translate that into SQL to run on the Snowflake environment. So really democratizing access to all the data assets, bringing everyone on board, and making it a true team sport where no one is left behind because of the language you work with. So Java, Python, Scala, all can be on board working with data without moving the data around, but pushing that workload to the data. We all know it's way easier to move code to data than to move data to code. And so Snowpark has addressed that in a very fundamental and effective fashion. So to get started with Snowpark, there's a lot of documentation which you can go ahead and read it on the Snowflake website. But I'm going to save a lot of that for us here by going through step by step the installation. So we understand why Snowpark is relevant. What we're going to see next is the installation of the IDE. So all you want to do is go over to IntelliJ, grab the latest version of the IDE, install it. There's a community edition, which you don't have to pay. It should be very, very straightforward to get that set up. Now, once you have IntelliJ available within your environment, you're going to be welcome to a screen that looks like this. And from here, I'm going to take it off, go through step by step. This is going to be a little bit of a longer video just because I want to make sure that we understand everything. I don't want to give a final product and people are wondering, but Fro, how did you get that done? Where did you click? If you blink, you might miss. So I'm going to try to go as slow as possible just so that you can follow. And I'm also going to timestamp this video. So if there's any piece of this setup I'm going through that you miss, just skip to this specific area and you can see what was done at that point. So that said, let's dive right into the very first project in here. Just click on new and you want to select the Scala project. Now, the reason why I have that available for me is because you want to go into plugins for the very first time. If you haven't done this before, your very first time, just make sure you go into plugins and install Scala. You want to make sure that's installed. If you need any other plugin, you can go ahead and do that. But for the main part, we need Scala. Now, going back to projects, we're going to create our brand new project. We're going to select Scala and we're going to choose SBT. So the Scala build tool. Now, the next piece is just go ahead and click next and we'll give it a name. So let's call this Snowpack Equity Flow. Okay, just give it any name you want. We want to select the JDK. Scala is of the Java family, so it runs on the JVM, needing a JDK version to be selected. We're going to also select the SBT version. You can keep all of this pretty much the same. We might change the Scala version at the end. So let's go ahead and just click finish. And what this would do is it's going to bring us to a brand new canvas ready for us to do our work. Is going to extract the project. It's going to set up the structure here, pretty much ABC of working with Scala. It's a very structured format of working with stuff. So everything should be up and ready for us to go. Now, before we can start doing a Python or Scala code to talk to Snowpack, we need to configure some specific things in the IDE to get all the binaries that we need to interact with that Snowpack API so we can talk to Snowflake. And that's what we're going to do here in the next setup. So going back into our environment, the first thing that we want to do is go over to build.sbt, double click on that, and you're going to see in here. So we're going to paste one line of code, or maybe 2 lines of code, I should say. And I can leave this code, or I will leave this code in the description if you want to follow along. The very first one is just a resolver where we're going to pull the binaries or the APIs. And in here, we're just telling the libraries and the dependencies that we need. So this is the crucial line. So the Snowflake, Snowpark, and this is the version we're getting. The next line here is optional. This is just to allow us to pass passwords in a type-safe fashion. You don't have to do this, but it's gonna come in handy down the line in the presentation. So go ahead and save this, close out from that, and we should have that saved. But what you also want to do is just make sure you rebuild your project with SBT. So what this is going to do is it's going to tell SBT to go out and physically download those binaries, those dependencies, and attach them to our project here. All right, so let's go ahead and go to view. We're going to go to tools, go over to SBT. It's going to show up on the right side here. And what we want to do is just click on reload all SBT projects. Okay, so it's going to take a few seconds here. It's going to reload all SBT projects using the configurations that we've set up. All right, so it takes a few minutes. That should be reloaded. Now, while that is reloading, we're going to do a couple of things. The very first one is, okay, that finished successfully, which is good. That was a success. So we're going to go back into our Scala folder, main.scala, and we're going to create a new class. So this is going to be a new Scala class for us. Let's just call this main. So that's going to be our entry point. Now here, this is where it gets really exciting. So again, don't blink. We might miss what's going to happen here. So in here, and you can access this code in the link below, what we're going to do is, with the magic of pasting, we're going to paste a line of code, and I'm going to walk us through what this code exactly is doing so we can follow step by step. The very first thing happening here is we're importing the Snowpark API. So we're just going and pulling in those dependencies into this project, into our code here. So this is what the first 3 lines is doing for us. Let's take this away. All right. So once we have that, the last line here is just getting a type safe. Again, you can skip this, but what you really need is the first 2, and then another one here, which is just to display at the point of executing my data frames. So just paste that in. We have our main function, and in this function, we're going to load from a configuration file. And within that configuration file, we're going to grab a password. That password is named dev.password. So pretty straightforward stuff. And then the next piece here is we're going to set up some config, and we're going to tell this config how to connect to my Snowflake environment. The URL is needed. If you want to grab your URL for your Snowflake account, just go over, grab this for whatever account you have, paste that in there. You're good. Your user password is hidden because I'm going to pass that in the config. And then the role and the account admin should be all taken care of. Now, we actually have to set up a config environment for us to make this work. And this follows with the config factory. Is a pretty standard way of setting up things here. What you want to do is make sure you create a new folder in the main. We're going to call that resources. And this is a pretty standard format. And then within resources, we're just going to right click and create a new file. And you want to call that file applications.property. It's very important to have the names the same. You have to name it applications.property in a resources folder. Now, once we have that, just double click on the application.property. We're going to put in a new property here called dev password. And here we can throw in whatever password you have. Of course, I'm not going to show my password here on the screen. But once you have the password, you want to save that. And the code is going to read from that dev.password and then pass that into the screen securely. All right, so we have my password saved and tucked away within my application.property. And now we're gonna just grab that value and then send that into the configs in here. And this allows us to connect to Snowflake using Snowpack. And the way we're gonna do that is, again, we're specifying the URL, the user, the password, the role, the warehouse, and the database. So we're going to be working with the sample database, so Snowflake sample data, and the specific one is the TPCH dataset Snowflake one we're going to be working with. Now we instantiate a session here and pass in the config, and with that session, what we're going to do here is show uh, all the tables available. So we're just going to write a simple query in here to show all the tables. At this point, we're just trying to validate, number one, that we can connect securely to our Snowflake environment. So everything being equal, we can go over, minimize this for a second, hit on run main as our entry point. It's going to do our build, and if everything works just well, we should have Snowpark up and running for us. Okay, I think I identified the issue. It doesn't seem to recognize my dev password for some reason, and I think the issue is my file isn't named correctly. So let's go ahead and rename that. We want to make sure the names are specific. So application, not applications, dot property. Give that a try. And if we come back here, run this one more time. Hopefully, we still have an issue. So we seem to be having some issues running this. Give it one more try, and I'm going to show how I debugged it. So if you're running into these issues, you have a step-by-step guide to get this debugged. So what I realized was, if I go back into my build tool, the Scala version here, because Snowflake supports certain levels of the Scala version, you want to make sure you're running at the Scala version that is supported at Snowflake. My number here was a little bit different at this point. To the 12, the 13 would be what is supported. So just make a change to that. We're going to go ahead, save that. And as always, make sure we rebuild the SBT project by going to SBT, doing a rebuild of that project to update all the things we need updated. And once that rebuild has happened, let's go back into our main and let's instantiate, let's run that main method. All right, so the main method did run. It just took a few seconds or so for the rebuild to happen. And now you can see we can show all our tables from within Snowflake. So pretty good. Now, if I went back in and I say, hey, let's actually see how many records we had from here. So select, let's say count from our customers. So let's grab how many records we have from customers. If I did that, took this query, run it from here, should be all good. If I brought the same query over into Snowpark and I threw that query in and I run this, with luck, we should have some results. So let's go back, rerun this, not in debug mode. Let's just run this as main. Now we've got over is that 150,000 records in that table. I think it showed there for a second. Yep, 150,000 records in here. Now at this point, we've established connection to the Snowpark environment in Snowflake. But if we go back to our presentation, someone watching would say, "Phew, what you're doing is just writing SQL, embedding that in a connector and sending that to Snowflake for that to work." But I have pandas, I have NumPy, I have other libraries I want to work with. That is not part of SQL. Aren't you just doing the same thing again? And the answer to that is no. The answer to that is no. And we're going to see how Snowpack really changes the game. So let's Control Z this. We can see all our tables. That's ABC, basic stuff for us to connect to Snowpack. Where it really gets exciting is being able to use the native libraries and APIs within Scala to talk to Snowpark and write the way you write your normal Scala code, but it's going to execute in Snowflake. So to see how we're going to do that, the very first thing that I'm going to do here is just to set the context. We do have the tables that are here. We have customer table, orders table. We want to join, do some really interesting analytics and get some results. But if all we do is grab this SQL and plug it into my code on this side, it's not going to be very effective. That's not what we want. All right, we want to use the native APIs, and this is where Snowflake and Snowpark makes that super easy. So the very first thing that we're going to do is start taking advantage of the pandas data frames, right? So pandas does offer us data frames that we can take advantage of, and Snowflake has that integration with. So we're just going to call it a new data frame there, and we're going to declare that using the same session that we have above here, and we're just going to call that session, and we're going to read from Snowflake. We're going to read a table, and what is that table? We're going to call it customer. All right, so we're going to call that table customer. So now we can read the customer table into a data frame, and just imagine now you have a data frame like any other data frame that you can work with the way you typically would work with in a data science perspective. So in this case now, we're gonna just let's just do a data frame to show, to see that we actually have data coming into this data frame. So let's run this. It built, it should show us what we have in our customer table, maybe 10 records or so. And it does show us, let's comment this out. So it does show us about 10 records or so on the customer table. But here's where it gets interesting, because this code that we wrote is getting pushed down into Snowflake as SQL. We're not bringing that data back out here. If this was a complex transformation, that's happening on the Snowflake side in this case. And you can see it by going over into history, and we use the pandas library, and we say show. But if I go over here and I refresh, you can see that my query is coming in, and Snowpark has generated that query for me. Okay, again, it's a basic query, but you get the idea of what's going on here. You're writing using the native libraries with data frame, and Snowpark is translating that to SQL for us. So let's even do some more interesting stuff here other than just showing tables. You can go ahead and do filters the way you normally would do filters with data frames. So we're gonna take this DF and let's throw a filter around that and filter on the column. And what column do you want to filter on? I know it has a column here called let's find a column that we can filter on. See national key. Let's grab that column and filter on that, where the value equals to, let's make that value equals 24. Okay. So now, again, all your native data frames functions, we're going to we can access that using Snowflake. So let's show filter here, and let's show the result. I'm going to run this. Okay. Again, we're writing in pandas. We're using the native APIs. We're executing using our favorite IDEs, our favorite workflows that you already have, and all of that result from a data science perspective is going to Snowflake. Now we see just a 24. And if I go back over and I do my refresh on the history, what comes back over here? Okay, I haven't written a single line of code. Let's refresh this. I haven't written a single line of code, but you can see Snowpark is translating that, writing the highly performant SQL for us with all the way and the conditional clauses, and sending that over to Snowflake for us, doing that push down, bringing that workload over into Snowflake, and the result we can get in here. So now the sky really is a limit for all the data scientists out there with all the libraries and all the code you've written. Taking that and making it run on a performant platform like Snowflake is game changing. This is what really changes the game. Now, I'm going to use the magic of pasting in here and just paste a couple of lines of code just so that we can see what happens when you have the power of Snowflake and Snowpark in your fingertips as a data scientist. So in here, we're going to go in, bring in the customer. read from the customer table. I'm going to hold that in the data frame. This is all lazy processing. So just by declaring this, it doesn't actually process unless it's at runtime before it gets processed. So we're just going to grab a couple of tables. So 3 tables, we're holding that in some data frames. And then in here, again, we can do joins the way you do joins in normal data frames. So I'm going to my customer and I'm joining that to my orders on the order key. So that's the common key. Now, once I have that, I'm going to take the join from here and do some more processing a little bit later on. We're going to group by ship mode, because in this case, I want to see what mode of shipping is most cost effective, or is generating the most revenue, I should say. One mode of shipping is generating the most revenue. So I'm going to group by ship mode. I'm grabbing ship mode and order and total price, grouping by ship mode, and then just counting um, uh, the effectiveness of that shipping mode. Okay, and if we take this and show this result, so let's comment this one out. Let's comment the 2 out above. So if we show this result, we should get an idea of the mode of shipping that is generating the most sales or the most business for my organization. Again, we're doing all of this using native pandas functionality without writing a single line of code, and we're interacting with this relational database like Snowflake. And this is where the game really changes. So in here we see the results. Tracking is there. I can do a sort by at some point there and get the better result. Hey guys, Fru here. Just pause the video. During my edit, I discovered I could answer a question that could come up very much as you work with Snowflake and Snowpark. Teams might be wondering, what about Spark? Yes, what about Spark? We know a lot of data science folks, data scientists, might be using Scala today and executing something like this on the Spark execution engine. Now, what about Spark? So we know Snowflake, when Snowflake came to market, it fundamentally disrupted the game by separating storage from compute, having the elastic scalable warehouses. No one in the game comes close to Snowflake's ability to run true data warehousing, separating storage from compute with concurrency, elasticity in the game. So teams love the data warehousing aspect of Snowflake. It's second to none. Now, you may say to yourself, what if my organization has gone through all that effort of loading data into my data warehouse, and we have amazing compute available here for teams to use, but then we have a separate Spark environment just to go off to the side and run Spark code? And what you have to do at that point is copy data from your data warehouse to go over to your Spark cluster, and you run Spark code over there. And now you have to copy the data back. And now the team has to maintain 2 environments, one for your data warehouse and everything else. And then on the other corner of the side of this, or the corner of the room, you've got the Spark folks that are doing the thing, and now you have 2 copies of data. The issues that comes with trying to maintain 2 environments just gets out of hand pretty quickly. Think about having a table with a billion records or 10 billion records with machine IoT data coming into your environment here in Snowflake. And now you've got to copy that data over into your Spark environment just so that the folks that write Spark code are happy. And now what Snowpack is doing, and this is where the game changes, is it says, hey, you write the Spark code in Scala as usual, you get rid of that Spark environment, but you push this code down. You push this code down into Snowflake, and Snowflake scalable compute, which is the warehouses here, takes care of it, optimized for parallelization, and it runs that code at blazing fast performance. People already trust the speed of Snowflake and the simplicity. Now, just bringing that simplicity over into the folks that typically will write Scala and Java. You don't have to maintain a separate Spark environment, I should say. You don't have to maintain a separate Java environment to run Spark, or a separate cluster to run all of that. Just focus on the code. You get rid of all the unnecessary environments, and you push that workload into Snowflake using Snowflake's compute engine. That becomes your Spark. It becomes the thing that actually does the job. by pushing down that workload into Snowflake using the Snowpack API. All right, so with that said, we're gonna continue back into the presentation. So guys, so there you have it. Hopefully this walkthrough has given you an idea on being able to set up your environment. Just to recap, you grab IntelliJ, going back to our presentation here. Here what we've seen, you want to grab IntelliJ. It's pretty free. You install IntelliJ, make sure you have the Scala plugin, and as soon as you come in, the very first thing you want to do is set up your SBT versions. You paste this 3 lines of code. Make sure your Scala version is what Snowflake supports. If you miss that, you might run into some issues. As soon as you're done, you go back to view. Make sure in the view piece, you refresh, everything is in place. You create your main project, and off you're ready to go. I'm going to leave this code. It's a very basic code here, but just to give you an idea as a primer in my GitHub so you can follow along, be up and running, and who knows what you can write and discover when you have the power of Snowpack at your fingertips. All right, guys, so there you have it. This has been Fru. Thanks for sticking along to at the end of a little bit of a longer demo. Hopefully you found this valuable. If you had any questions, don't hesitate to jump into the comment section below. Let me know. I'll see what I can do. Again, you've been very awesome sticking to the end. I have been Fru. I'll see you in our next presentation.